The afternoon sun fell hard across the Arizona desert. The wind carried dust that shimmered in the light and made the horizon blur like a dream. Daniel Cole, a quiet rancher in his 30s, guided his horse along a narrow trail between the red cliffs. He had been out since dawn searching for a few lost calves that had wandered from his ranch. The land was familiar to him, rough, wide, and lonely. But something about that day felt strange. The air had a stillness that made him uneasy, as if the desert was holding its breath. He stopped near a dried riverbed to water his horse when he heard it, a faint sound like someone calling for help. At first he thought it was the wind echoing through the rocks. Then he heard it again, weaker this time. A voice. Daniel's heart jumped. He tied his horse and followed the sound on foot, moving between the mesquite trees. The ground was hot enough to burn through his boots, and his throat felt dry as bone. After a few minutes, he saw something lying near a broken wagon. It was an old woman. Her gray hair was braided, her skin dark and wrinkled from years under the sun. She wore a faded blanket with Apache patterns on it, and her right leg was trapped under the edge of the wagon wheel. She must have fallen or been attacked. The horse that pulled the wagon was gone. Only hoof prints in the sand showed the direction it had run. Daniel rushed forward. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he said softly. Her eyes opened just enough for him to see their cloudy brown color. "Water," she whispered. He gave her water from his flask and then checked her leg. It was badly swollen and bleeding. He used his belt as a makeshift bandage and tried to lift the wagon enough to free her leg. It took every ounce of strength he had, but finally he managed it. When he pulled her clear, she groaned in pain but didn't cry out. Apache people were known for their strength, and even in her weakness, she carried that quiet pride. Daniel looked around. There were no roads nearby, no houses, and the nearest town was almost 20 miles away. He knew if he left her there, she would die before nightfall, so he lifted her gently and placed her on his horse, climbing up behind her. She was light, almost like a child, but the responsibility on his shoulders felt heavier than the mountains around him. As they rode, the sun began to sink, painting the cliffs gold and red. Daniel spoke to her softly, hoping to keep her awake. "We'll get you to town, ma'am. There's a doctor there. Just hold on." She murmured something in her language, words he didn't understand, then looked at him and said weakly, "You, brave cowboy, take care of her." Daniel frowned. "Take care of who?" But she had already closed her eyes again. They reached a small settlement by nightfall. Daniel brought her to the clinic, and the local doctor, a man named Roberts, hurried to treat her. "You did the right thing bringing her here," Roberts said. "She's in bad shape, but she might make it if she rests." Daniel stayed by her side through the night. He brought her water and covered her with an old blanket. She slept most of the time, breathing shallowly. At one point she woke and looked at him again. "Your heart is good," she said slowly. "Many do not stop for old women in the desert." Daniel smiled faintly. "No one deserves to die alone out there." She nodded, then drifted off again. The next morning, Roberts told Daniel that the old woman's injuries were serious and that she would need days, maybe weeks, to recover. Daniel didn't know her name or where she came from, but he felt he couldn't just leave her alone. He paid for her stay at the clinic and went back to his ranch to bring supplies. When he returned 2 days later, the old woman was sitting up, sipping broth. She gave him a soft smile. "You came back," she said. "Of course I did," he answered. Her name, he learned, was Naya. She lived alone in a small Apache camp a few miles from the mountain ridge. She had been bringing herbs and dried meat to trade in town when her wagon wheel broke. Bandits had frightened her horse and left her trapped. Daniel listened quietly, anger flickering in his chest. "Those men could have killed you," he said. "They take what they want," Naya said calmly. "But you stopped. You did not turn away. That is what matters." Over the next week, Daniel visited her every evening. He brought food, read old newspapers to her, and listened to her stories. She told him about her youth, how she had once ridden across the plains with her husband, who had been a respected scout. She spoke of losing her family one by one, until she was the last of her small band. Yet she didn't speak with sadness, but with peace, as if she had already made peace with life itself. Daniel began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: warmth in his heart. He had lived alone for a long time after losing his parents and working the ranch by himself. The long days and silent nights had turned him into a quiet man. But when Naya spoke, It was like the desert wind carried wisdom, and for the first time he listened to someone other than his own thoughts. One evening, when the sun was low and the sky turned purple, a young Apache girl came to the clinic. She looked barely 16 with long dark hair and alert eyes. She carried a small pouch and spoke quickly to the nurse before turning to Daniel. "You saved my grandmother," she said. "I am Tala." Daniel nodded politely. "She's strong. She'll be fine soon." Tala looked at him seriously. "My grandmother says you must come with us when she leaves the town. She says you are chosen to protect." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Protect who?" She pointed at herself. "Me." Before he could ask more, Naya called out from the bed, smiling faintly. "Take care of her, brave cowboy." Daniel didn't know what to say. He just stood there, confused, as the two women shared a look that seemed to carry something deeper, something ancient. That night he sat outside the clinic looking at the stars. He thought about Naya's words and the strange peace he felt around her. She reminded him of the land itself, strong, silent, and unbroken. Maybe she saw something in him too, something he didn't yet understand. The next morning Naya was feeling better. The doctor said she could leave in a day or two. Daniel offered to take them both home on his wagon. Tala agreed, though she seemed nervous about something. "There are men who watch the roads," she said quietly. "The same ones who hurt my grandmother." Daniel clenched his fists. If they come again, they won't hurt anyone this time. He didn't know what he was stepping into, but deep down, he didn't care. He had made a promise to an old woman whose eyes held the wisdom of the mountains. And when she called him a brave cowboy, he felt for the first time in a long while that maybe he was. As the dawn broke, Daniel packed supplies for the journey. The desert stretched out before him, vast, harsh, but beautiful. He looked toward the horizon, where the Apache camp waited beyond the ridge. Somewhere out there were answers, danger, and perhaps something more. He glanced once more at Naya resting peacefully, and at Tala standing beside her, ready but uncertain. Daniel adjusted his hat, climbed onto the wagon, and smiled faintly. "Let's get you home," he said. The wheels turned slowly over the sand as the three of them headed toward the mountains, unaware that what awaited them there would change all of their lives forever. The morning air was cool when Daniel started the wagon toward the mountains. The wheels creaked softly over the sand and the old horse snorted with each step. Naya sat beside him, wrapped in her blanket, while Tala sat in the back holding a basket of herbs and a small knife. The desert stretched wide on all sides, endless and quiet. Daniel had ridden these lands before, but with the two Apache women beside him it felt different. The silence carried a weight like something unseen was watching them. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, turning the land gold. Naya spoke softly, telling stories about the spirits of the mountains and how each cliff had a name. Her voice was calm, and Daniel listened even though he didn't understand every word. He found comfort in it, like a lullaby carried by the wind. Tala, however, kept glancing behind them, her eyes sharp. "Something wrong?" Daniel asked. She hesitated. "Those men," she said quietly. "They might follow. They want what my grandmother carries." Daniel looked back at the road, empty except for dust and sagebrush. "What does she carry?" Tala touched her chest. "Not gold. Not silver. Something else." "A promise." Daniel frowned but didn't ask more. Whatever it was, it mattered deeply to them, and he respected that. By noon, they stopped near a dry creek to rest. Daniel fed the horse and poured water into a small cup for Naya. She smiled at him. "You have kind eyes," she said softly. "Like my son long ago." Daniel smiled faintly. "Was he a rancher too?" She shook her head. "He was a soldier. Brave, but he never came back from the border fights. I see the same courage in you. That is why I trust you with her." Daniel looked at Tala, who pretended not to listen, but her face softened a little. He still didn't understand what Naya meant by trusting him with her, but he felt something stir in his chest, a sense of duty he hadn't known he needed. When they started moving again, the wind picked up. Dust rose around them and the sky began to turn gray. Daniel could smell rain coming, rare for that season. He urged the horse faster, wanting to reach the mountain pass before the storm hit. The cliffs grew taller, shadows stretching across the road like fingers. That's when Tala suddenly whispered, "Riders." Daniel turned. In the distance, 3 figures appeared on horseback, moving fast. He could see dust clouds behind them. His stomach tightened. They weren't travelers. Their movement was too sharp, too purposeful. "Get down," he said quickly. Tala pulled her grandmother low while Daniel snapped the reins. The wagon jolted forward. The horse galloped, hooves pounding against the dirt. The sound of the riders grew louder. Bullets didn't fly, but Daniel could hear shouting, angry voices echoing between the rocks. He didn't need to understand the words to know they meant trouble. The path curved along a narrow ridge with steep drops on both sides. Daniel gritted his teeth and held the reins tight. "Hold on," he shouted. The wagon bounced over rocks, the wheels squealing. Naya prayed softly under her breath, her eyes closed while Tala clung to the side. One of the riders got close enough for Daniel to see his face, sunburned with a red scarf tied around his neck. He reached for something at his belt, but Daniel pulled a sharp turn toward a cluster of rocks. The wagon scraped against stone but stayed upright. The rider slowed, unsure whether to follow. Daniel drove the horse into a narrow canyon, where the walls closed in. The path ended at a dead end, a small cave under a cliff. He pulled the wagon inside and covered the entrance with dry branches and brush. They waited, breathing hard. Minutes passed. The sound of horses echoed outside, then faded away. Daniel finally let out a long breath. "They're gone." Naya looked at him with a knowing smile. "You have courage, cowboy. The spirits walk with you." Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. "Spirits or not, that was too close." Tala sat beside her grandmother, holding her hand. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They know where we go." Daniel leaned back against the wall of the cave. "Then we'll go before dawn." "They won't expect that." The storm hit soon after, heavy rain and wind that roared through the canyons. They lit a small fire inside the cave, its glow warm and comforting. Naya pulled something from under her blanket, a small leather pouch. She placed it between her hands and whispered a few words before offering it to Daniel. "This is what they want," she said. Daniel looked at it. "What is it?" "Seeds," Naya said softly. "From the old lands. My husband kept them safe long ago. They grow medicine that can heal and feed our people. Some think they are worthless. Others think they bring power. You brought me back to life, so now I give this to you." Daniel shook his head. "I can't take that." "You already have," she said. "Because you protect what matters, not for gold, not for name. That is the true reward." Tala looked at her grandmother with tears in her eyes. "Grandmother, you can't give that away." Naya smiled sadly. "It is not giving away. It is giving forward." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The sound of rain outside was steady, almost peaceful. He looked at the pouch resting beside him. Something about it felt sacred. He didn't understand why she trusted him with it, but he knew he couldn't let harm come to her or Tala. Before dawn, they set out again. The land was fresh after the rain, the air clean and cool. They followed a narrow trail through the hills until the Apache camp appeared in the distance. Small homes made of wood and hides, smoke rising from the fires. Children played near the edge of the camp, and a few adults watched quietly as the wagon approached. When they stopped, several elders came forward, greeting Naya in their language. One of them, a tall man with gray braids, now looked at Daniel carefully. Then he nodded with respect. "You brought her home," he said in slow English. Daniel helped Naya down from the wagon. She stood shakily, leaning on her stick. "This man risked his life for me," she said. "He carries what we once lost," Tala translated softly, and the elders bowed their heads. Daniel felt uncomfortable under their gaze, but Naya only smiled. The next few days passed peacefully. Naya rested among her people, and Daniel helped repair a few wagons and fences around the camp. The children followed him everywhere, curious about his hat and boots. Tala watched him from a distance, sometimes smiling shyly. Slowly, Daniel began to feel like part of something that didn't judge him for his silence or his past. On the third night, Naya called him to her tent. She looked weaker now, her face pale under the lamplight. "It is time for me to rest," she said softly. "You kept your promise." Daniel knelt beside her. "You'll be fine. You just need more time." She smiled faintly. "My time is already full. You gave me the gift of one more sunrise. That is enough. When I'm gone, take care of her, brave cowboy." Tears burned his eyes, but he nodded silently. By dawn, Naya had passed away peacefully, her hands folded around the pouch. The camp mourned her with songs that echoed through the valley. Daniel stayed through the ceremony, feeling an ache deep in his chest. She had come into his life like a desert storm, sudden, fierce, and gone too soon. But she had changed everything inside him. After the funeral, Tala approached him. She held out the small pouch. "She wanted you to keep it," she said. "She said the land listens to hearts that are pure. You have that heart." Daniel hesitated, then took it gently. "I'll guard it for both of you." Tala looked up at him, her eyes shining. "She said you were the last promise she ever made." Daniel didn't know what to say. He looked at the horizon, the wide, endless desert, and felt something deep inside him settle. Weeks later, when Daniel rode back to his ranch, the land looked the same, wild and quiet. But it didn't feel empty anymore. The wind carried a different sound, a whisper of peace. Hanging around his neck was the leather pouch tied with a small string. He didn't wear it for luck or pride. He wore it because it reminded him that one good act, one choice to stop and help, could change a life, or save one. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would ride to the edge of his land and look toward the mountains. He could almost hear her voice in the wind, calm, proud, and full of warmth. "Take care of her, brave cowboy." And every time he heard it, he tipped his hat and smiled toward the fading sun, knowing that he had already been given the greatest reward of all: purpose, peace, and a bond that no desert wind could ever erase.